Welcome to the studio at the David Stanoch School of Drumming. I'm going to go over some variations in jazz ride cymbal technique for you today. Today's demonstration will be played on this beautiful Paiste Masters Series extra dry ride, 21 inches. Really makes for a nice sounding cymbal for the purposes of this demo. Another great asset for my demonstration is this beautiful stick by Vic Firth from their Modern Jazz collection. This is the MJC No. 2 series. Check out the bead. It has an elongated sort of teardrop and a more pointed tip. And this is really advantageous for music where you want to get a lot of color out of a cymbal, because the less mass you have on the cymbal gives you a certain kind of articulation, and then if you flatten out to get more of the meat of the bead, you get a lot more presence, almost like the difference between like an unaccented phrase or a fully accented one. So here's a breakdown of some techniques for playing the ride cymbal in a jazz context. Some traditional and maybe some non-traditional, but there's a variety of ways to approach the cymbal, and we're going to look at some of the more commonly effective ones. The first thing is to establish a good quarter note pulse and get a nice sound out of the cymbal. A glancing blow, maybe more with the tip of the stick, is for me kind of a good starting point. Sort of a sound that might be something like this. Thumb is up. I'm kind of using a wrist motion across the cymbal, because if I turn into sort of a German grip and play with the thumb to the side and straight down, I'm getting a lot more volume and overtone out of the cymbal than, let's say, I might need at first. That's going to work really well if the big band is roaring and if you're playing outside, and there's definitely ways to make that work. But as a starting point, thumb up, glancing blow, more of the tip than the meat of the tip, and play across the cymbal. I'm also creating a sound chamber, sort of a Jimmy Cobb kind of a thing, where I've closed off air with the fingertips on the cymbal and the thumb here, but I've left a chamber open in here to get this sort of clicking sound. And that brings out a different sort of focused sound in the cymbal than if I, like, say, loosen the grip, loosen the fingers, or use another technique where I snap with just the fingers across the cymbal, sort of a Tony Williams thing. Here's Jimmy Cobb. And now Jimmy Cobb into like a Tony Williams with just the fingers sounding like this. So here we go, one to the other. You can hear more high-end overtones come off the cymbal when I release the sound chamber, because I'm letting everything vibrate. One technique that's sort of in between, like if we say the fingers, close up the fingers, more of the sound chamber, and the wrist, and then between there and like turning over to more of a up down with the wrist, flat part of the tip, maximum overtone out of the cymbal kind of sound. In between that is this technique attributed to Sam Woodyard with Duke Ellington's band. It's sort of like a lasso swirling kind of thing, and what it does is it helps you get more velocity into the cymbal, but you're still using the glancing blow, so you're not maxing out the overtones. But like if I go from this type of grip, playing across the cymbal, rather than just going back and forth with a wrist motion or a finger motion, I throw in and loop around. So it'd be like, that's a nice feeling thing. It works for any tempo, like when you play with a brush. You know, the tempo and the size of the circle you're sweeping need to be relative, and so same thing up here. You know, you're making a rhythmic motion, and the size of the circle can be relative to the tempo, but if it gets too fast, it doesn't really make any sense. So one thing we can also do that changes from everything glancing downbeat wise in this direction, inward, across the cymbal, with the wrist or fingers, is the idea that when we're going back to make the next stroke, we're using the wrist, but we can also use more of a ball and socket kind of motion. And that motion comes in handy when you start to change from the quarter note pulse to the gallop or the spangalang. I can still use the lateral motion, but I can rotate my way back to 1. It's not so much this kind of thing that you might see written down sometimes where they say play across the cymbal and the diagrams look like completely vertical, like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. In practice, for me anyway, it's more about the idea of when I get to 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. I am going back that way. A 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1, 2, a 3, 4. So like 2 and 4 would be this way, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm catching 1 on my way back to 2. 1, 2. And then bouncing the stick on the back to the 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the wrist, and so it's not like a hinge as much as it is the ball and socket. Exaggerate it at a slower tempo, but I'm still kind of wanting to come in lateral. It's not this, right? And there's a difference in the sound for sure. Using the ball and socket motion is a nice feeling way to approach the cymbal. You can observe it in Buddy Rich's technique when you watch videos of him. I noticed he used that. But as tempos get faster, there is another technique that was taught to me by Jeff Hamilton, so I like to call it the Hamilton stroke, and I know a lot of drummers use it. It's effective at any tempo, and it basically is a bit more of a vertical stroke at faster tempos, and it can vary at slower tempos, but the idea is it involves now more of wrist and finger combination motion, where you snap the stick up on 1 and drop it on 2, sort of like a roll technique, but sort of backwards. The downstroke isn't the first one and the upstroke isn't the second one. You're starting with the upstroke. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And the reason you do that is so that you can get the bounce on the skip beat of the gallop on your way back to the snap. Because if you drop on 2 and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you get that extra bounce, and then you pick the stick back up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And that motion has a nice, loose, bluesy kind of feel to it at slower tempos, but at faster tempos, it's very, very effective for being able to play up tempo with clarity and good control and not sloppy. In other words, there's a difference between like maybe just dropping the stick and letting it bounce, like a multiple bounce or triple stroke, without a lot of finger control. 1, there's that, but then there's this. Where, you know, the downbeat and the snap give greater clarity to the quarter note pulse. And that's definitely something to check out. It can make a nice transition out of the ball and socket motion into the Hamilton stroke as you would maybe build tempo. Ball and socket. Lose the rotation, more fingers. Like so.